Chinese smartphone manufacturer Meizu came up with an unusually strong proposition last year when it launched the MX4. And now, a year later, Meizu is ready to follow this up with its successor, the MX5. The company has shaken things up considerably with this phone, but overall, the formula has remained pretty much unchanged. The same design language, the same software, but now accompanied by an even larger display, and a continued emphasis on what is once again a class-leading screen-to-body size ratio. The MX5 seems to have it all on paper. More than decent hardware, big screen, nice design, but is it really good enough to make us want to use it day in and day out? Let's find out. The overall appearance of Meizu phones has always gravitated around a single design concept, one that is very iPhone 3GS-like. That's not really a bad thing. Slimming bezels all around, the company reached an impressive 74% screen-to-body size ratio with the MX5. That's very important because this phone has a massive 5.5-inch display, and if it's to be comfortable to hold, slimming down the bezels around the display is a top priority. Overall, we're pleased with the in-hand feel of the Meizu MX5. The phone even manages to feel surprisingly light. The metal backplate also adds to the premium look and feel of the handset, as do the shiny chamfered edges surrounding the front. Sadly, the MX5 continues to be heavily inspired by the iPhone's design, which is now most evident by the arrangement of the bottom side, where the microphone, charging port, screws and speakers look in an almost identical way to those of the iPhone 6. We are mostly pleased with how the buttons react. The volume and power lock key, which is conveniently situated here in the mid right hand side, have a terrific response that makes you want to press them again and again. Sadly, the same thing cannot be said about the home button, which now also incorporates a fingerprint scanner. The problem with it is that it seems to have too much of a click sound, and it's also a bit on the wobbly side, so as a result it makes a defined and audible sound upon being pressed, but it also has so much presence that it comes off as cheap rather than satisfying. If there's one thing that we like about the Meizu MX5's display, it has to be its size. At 5.5 inches, its screen we would wholeheartedly enjoy, considering the reasonable footprint of the phone. Due to a combination of its impressive 74% screen-to-size ratio and thoughtfully rounded backplate, the MX5 allows us to work with a giant screen at little cost in the way of comfort. Resolution-wise, we're grateful to Meizu for being level-headed and sticking with 1080 by 1920 pixels, delivering the outstanding 401 ppi density. What we're not so grateful for is its decision to switch to an AMOLED screen, which has compromised some crucial aspects of the display, such as color balance and brightness output. Maximum brightness has suffered greatly, as it now peaks at the very modest 335 nits, which is quite insufficient. In comparison, last year's MX4 reached 535 nits. So making matters worse is the inaccurate color balance, which throws way too much green in there, taking the life out of whatever comes out on screen. The oversaturated colors help negate that to an extent, but really the effect is similar to kind of trying to balance out a salty dish with sugar. What's more, automatic brightness control is definitely not up to snuff in the MX5. It cannot keep brightness at an optimal level as you're going through different environments of various lighting. Most of the time it defaults to a brighter display state than needed, so if you're not okay with that, you have to constantly adjust it manually. On one hand, we like the fast response and simplicity of the latest Flame user interface that's found on the MX5. On the other, the number of issues that we've encountered thus far has us worried, as it hints at the software's underdeveloped status. Running on top of Android 5 is the so-called Flame OS 4.5. Probably due to the Lollipop Foundation, this latest Flame version exhibits a very fast and fluid response, which is a bit faster than its predecessor. So performance is good, but how about the rest of the experience? Well, things mostly work well, but they aren't really so jolly once you look beyond the surface. For example, there are some options in the settings, the titles of which are not displayed in full. Another strange software issue is that you can't simply dismiss calendar notifications, unlike all other types of notifications. Meanwhile, there is no landscape view in the messages and email applications, which means no landscape typing. And it's simply because Meizu hasn't designed landscape versions of its apps, because in other programs, such as the Google Play Store, the phone easily switches to landscape and presents you with a larger keyboard. The new physical home button incorporates a touch fingerprint scanner, which can be used for quick device unlocking, app protection, and making payments in Meizu's virtual stores. The fingerprint registration process isn't too user-friendly, but it works. Once you get your fingerprint registered on the MX5, the scanner works well. It's super quick and mostly accurate in recognizing your fingerprint, although it's not the best we've seen. Keeping its partnership with MediaTek going, Meizu has equipped the MX5 with the company's latest and greatest chipset, the Helio X10. This chip features a 64-bit CPU which can reach the impressive clock rate of 2.2 GHz. As with other MediaTek CPUs, this one is a killer in multi-core performance benchmarks, but doesn't come off as impressive in single-core and real-world scenarios. Still, benchmark numbers paint a pretty competitive profile for the Helio X10, and with the PowerVR G6200 GPU on hand, the configuration does manage to deliver more than decent frame rates most of the time. For the most part, we have to say that Flame's own browser works rather well. Scrolling and panning around with it is very efficient and fluid, while pinch zooming tends to be nimble enough. Sadly, Flame's browser suffers from incompatibility issues with some websites, proving to be unreliable in some situations, which is why we would advise you to go with some other Android browser. The megapixel race seems to be alive and well, following the example of big boys. Newer companies such as Meizu don't hesitate to equip their handsets with camera sensors that are packed with many megapixels. This seems to be the case here, as well as the Meizu MX5 arrives with a 20.7 megapixel camera sensor that produces images that are mediocre at best. The sensor itself is a 1/2.3 inch one with a pixel size of 1.2 microns. So far so good. The camera application has an interface that's mostly easy to get around. But there are some issues here as well. For example, as we're holding the phone in landscape mode, tapping the three-dot button brings up the settings that we can tweak. However, the settings pop-up doesn't appear in landscape view. Everything there is in portrait, so we're required to rotate the phone in our hands, change the settings that we want, and then turn it back into landscape again in order to take our pictures. On the plus side, there are many different modes and settings to work with. Outdoor image quality with Meizu's latest flagship is decent, but nothing impressive. There are relatively good detail levels and slightly oversaturated colors, but the amount of noise we observe is somewhat alarming. As a matter of fact, noise becomes an even more noticeable issue in indoor or lower light scenarios. Exposure isn't too good as well, with some images exhibiting too much overblown highlights. Speaking of exposure, the built-in HDR mode is quite unsatisfying. And while overall image quality with Meizu MX5's camera could come off as okay, video recording quality is terrifying. 1920 by 1080p video is very low on details, so much so that it makes it a rather unpleasant experience. On the other hand, 4K video, which we recorded with the handset, appeared to be pretty much unplayable on a normal computer. The 5.5-inch AMOLED screen is mostly a fine asset when it comes to watching video with the MX5. Because of the sheer size of it, the experience is good, but while the extra saturated AMOLED colors do make for a punchy image, we dislike the greenish tone that's given to everything due to the inaccurate color balance. In terms of loudness, we can't complain of the integrated speaker, but we can't complain of its quality. It sounds as if there's too much mid-frequencies, so making for a muddy audio that lacks depth, clarity, and brilliance. And unfortunately, our observations of the earphones that come with the box are very similar to this. Call quality is decent on the MX5, at least as far as volume goes. Incoming sound quality is about average, with slightly unclear voices and good strength. On the outgoing side, colors will be treated to a relatively clear, if somewhat sharp sounding, again with satisfying volume. The Meizu MX5's 1 to 2 day battery life tends to be aligned with what the majority of mid to high range smartphones demonstrate nowadays. Meizu's latest proposition scored 7 hours and 5 minutes on our custom battery test, which is not bad but not great either. This actually puts it slightly below its predecessor, as well as handsets like the Xiaomi Mi 4 and the OnePlus One. At the same time, it elevates it above some other popular phones like the OnePlus 2 and the LG G4. We wanted to like the MX5 for the undeniable charm of the series, but Meizu isn't making it easy for us. The MX5 is a well-designed phone, it looks and feels good, and it's also of decent size, considering it packs a massive 5.5-inch display. However, there are just too many compromises here with this phone. As much as we like the design, the display is a really subpar affair. It's vivid and punchy and whatnot, but maximum brightness is not high enough, while color balance is markedly off. It really is more of a step back from its predecessor in this respect than anything else. Then come all the issues that we have with the half-baked Flame user interface, which may run at a decent pace, but ultimately comes off as somewhat underdeveloped. At the end of the day, Meizu seems to be looking for ways to build upon its tried and tested formula, but this year's switch to AMOLED screen, as well as the unconvincing camera performance, have really compromised its product. True, Meizu's flagship comes at an affordable price, which ranges from around $330 to $400, which is a decent price, but keep in mind that you get what you pay for, if not less.